the Attorney General's office on the whole. So we'll begin with that and then get into the bulk of our presentation. So to begin with, that's the Attorney General. That's Attorney General Maura Healey. She was first elected in 2014, began serving in 2015, now in our second term here at the Attorney General's office under Attorney General Healey. And the Attorney General is the chief lawyer and law enforcement officer in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So that's obviously a very basic conception of the Attorney General's office and the work that it does. And one of the main goals of our division, the Community Engagement Division, is to help elaborate on that, to help make that clear, to help inform everyone of the services offered by the Attorney General's office and how it can be of assistance to them. So we like to flesh that out just a little bit more, who the Attorney General's office serves and how we do it. Well, to begin with, the Attorney General's office serves residents of the Commonwealth and their public interest. So a couple things about that. The first, residence is a word we choose particularly carefully. If you reside in Massachusetts, the Attorney General's office is here to represent your public interest. You don't need to have been born here. Regardless of citizenship status, the Attorney General's office is here to represent your public interest. What it does not mean, however, and a question we get a lot, is that the Attorney General's office can provide you with private legal opinion or private legal representation. That is not something that we are allowed to do. However, we do have, as we'll talk about, many services that still may be able to assist you even though we're not able to provide legal representation. The Attorney General's office is also the law office for state departments, officers, and commissions. So anytime a state governmental agency is brought into court, it's likely that the Attorney General's office is going to be the agency that is defending that separate state agency in court, that is the lawyers for that state agency. So that's another area where you may have a complaint against another state agency. We're happy to hear it here at the Attorney General's office. We're happy to try to direct you to the best place possible to make that complaint, but it's likely not going to be with our office because we are the law office for those other state departments, officers, and commissions. And finally here we have groups of consumers. So that could be really a whole number of things. It could be groups of homeowners, groups of tenants, groups of ratepayers in the case of electric utilities. What that there is to represent is that something does not need to be affecting every single person in Massachusetts in order for the Attorney General's office to take action. As an example, we'll talk about these competitive electric supply companies. There have been, I think, 3 enforcement actions from our office against particular competitive electric supply companies. You can find out more information about all those actions on our website. In those instances, right, those were companies that weren't affecting everyone in Massachusetts. If you break it down, it was probably a small percentage of consumers in Massachusetts who were affected by those companies, but those complaints came into our office, and in enforcing our consumer protection statutes, among others, we were able to take action based on those consumers who were affected by those companies. So again, that's just to say something does not need to be affecting every single person in Massachusetts in order for the Attorney General's office to take action. So how do we do this work? Well, these top 2 boxes we have up here are what you'd expect from a law enforcement agency. We do investigation work and enforcement work. Investigators in our office get these complaints, get these tips, do site visits, talk to folks who have been affected, and build the case for our office. For the enforcement work that is done by the attorneys in our office, we're about a 600-person office, and the vast majority of those people are attorneys who are doing this enforcement work from the office. Where I spend and my colleagues in the Community Engagement Division spend most of our time is in this prevention space. We give a lot of presentations where we are trying to, 1, prevent bad things from happening to folks by arming them with the information of what to look out for, and 2, informing them so they can stand up for themselves and hopefully prevent these bad outcomes. Now, we'll talk about some of the services that we offer. We have what's called a consumer advocacy service, where if you're having an issue, including with a competitive electric supply company, you can file a complaint with our office. We can reach out to that company on your behalf and try to resolve the issue. Again, it's not a legal setting, right? It's not that we're filing in court on your behalf, but we are reaching out to them on your behalf and trying to assist. And I'm glad that we have that service, but I also want to make sure people are armed with the appropriate information that hopefully they can prevent these bad outcomes. Hopefully they can prevent these situations from happening so they don't even need to make that complaint to our office. And finally, policy work. So obviously the Attorney General's office does not write the policy for the Commonwealth. That's obviously the state legislature that's doing that, but there is a policy team at our office. There are some areas where the Attorney General's office is responsible for promulgating regulations, and again, you can find many of those on our website. One I highlight because it was one that I was involved in when I first came with the office is the Earned Sick Time Law that passed on the ballot in 2014. You may remember that. It passed as a couple paragraphs of text, and it was on the Attorney General's office to issue a set of regulations so that employers were aware of what they had to follow and employees were aware of their rights. So that's one area where the Attorney General's office was responsible for policy, for promulgating those regulations. But there's a policy team at our office that works with the state legislature based on some of the things that we're seeing to ensure that the work that we're doing is informing the work that is going on over there. And where we're located, so right now I'm coming to you from our office in Boston. We actually have two offices in Boston, right by the State House, 1 Ashburn and 100 Cambridge Street, right in downtown Boston. We also have regional offices in downtown Springfield, downtown Worcester, and downtown New Bedford. What I like to say on this slide, however, is that we are happy to go as the Community Engagement Division wherever we're wanted, wherever there's a crowd of people who want to hear about one of the presentations that we give. We will go on the road and travel there. We're also happy to do things like this webinar, where we can reach people all across the Commonwealth with this information, even though we are, just skipped ahead there, even though we are physically located in Boston and we have these 3 other cities where we have offices where we travel the whole Commonwealth, and we're happy to go wherever we are asked. So that's a very brief overview of the Attorney General's office on the whole. Again, happy to get into some more of that as we go along the presentation as it comes up. But the bulk of the presentation is on these competitive electric supply companies. You may also hear them referred to as third-party electric supply companies. And on this first slide, we're going to try to suss out exactly what that is. And I think one of the best ways to describe a competitive electric supply company and combat some of the misinformation that comes with competitive electric supply companies is by starting by saying what they're not. And they're not your utility company, right? They are not Eversource, they are not National Grid, they are not Unitil, they are not your utility company. They're a company that purchases electricity wholesale, and then sells it. We have here to retail customers. They also sell it to businesses. They will also sell it to municipalities, and we'll talk about some of those different ways on future slides. Right? Essentially, they're an electricity broker, electricity middleman. They are buying it from the production, the electricity producers, and they are then selling it to other customers. If you switch to a competitive electric supply company, you're going to see it reflected as a line item on your electricity bill. So I think this is another really, really key point. If you switch to a competitive electric supply company, you don't all of a sudden start getting another bill. You still get your one bill from your utility company, be it Eversource or National Grid. That's going to be the case for most of us. You're going to see it, your electric supply, reflected as a line item on that bill. In fact, even if you're not with a competitive electric supply company, you will see your supply charges reflected as a line item on your electricity bill. And for many people, I think for most people, those electric supply charges are actually on the reverse of your electricity bill. So if you're looking at the front of your electricity bill, at least before we started doing these presentations, the only number I would really look at was the total amount of money that I owed, which was a big number in the upper right-hand corner on the front side. But if you look at your electricity bill, you will see how all the charges are laid out. And there are 2 major components, which is your supply and the delivery charges, the transmission charges that your utility company is going to charge you. And your supply is going to be on that reverse side. So if you switch to a competitive electric supply company, that's where you would see it reflected. That's also where you'll see the rate that you're paying for your electric supply. And your delivery charges are going to be unaffected by your electric supplier. It's just going to affect your supply charges. So I think that's another key point and one I just want to spend a second on here, because we have heard from folks who sign up with a competitive electric supply company, they realize that the rate for electric supply that they're being quoted is a little bit higher than the rate that they're currently paying, but are told by that electric supply company, well, what you have to consider is that you're not going to be paying us delivery charges, delivery fees. And technically, that's true. Your delivery fees, your delivery charges, the transmission fees are still going to your utility company. But what's not true, and I think what's implied there, is that you no longer have to pay delivery fees. You still do. They still go to your utility company. Your supply charges are the only ones that you're able to affect. The infrastructure is going to be stuck with your utility company. Your supply is what can be changed. So important to keep that in mind, that one, your supply is going to be on the backside of your bill. You want to check that out because, as we'll talk about, we have heard of people who have been switched over without their consent, right? They may not know that they have a competitive electric supply company. And two, your delivery charges are going to be unaffected, and that means they're going to be unaffected, right? It means you're going to have to keep paying them, even if your electric supply company is telling you that you're not going to have to pay it to them. So your electric supply options, where can your electric supply come from? Well, you can have what's called basic service. You may also hear referred to as fixed service. Fixed basic service has a bunch of different names, but essentially what it means is that your supply is coming from your utility company. Your utility company is procuring this electricity, this energy, every 6 months. And that's when your supply charges are going to change. So it varies for each of the utility companies. They're on slightly different cycles. I believe if you're with National Grid, we're going to get a new rate pretty soon up in November. I think with Eversource, that's not going to be till January. But your electricity rate is going to change every 6 months because your utility company is procuring it at that rate, and that's when they're setting those rates. So if you do nothing and you're not switched without your consent, and we'll talk about the second piece later, you're likely on this fixed basic service, as we have here, is generally the most affordable. You could also have what's called municipal aggregation. And municipal aggregation is when your city or town, or a group of cities and towns, gets together and negotiates a price for all of its ratepayers with a competitive electric supply company. So the city or town gets together, they contract out, they find a company, they get a quoted rate, and then they have all the city or towns or group of city or towns, ratepayers, all those consumers, switched over to this new company, assuming they were on basic service. So how it generally works with municipal aggregation is it's an opt-out system. So if your city or town chooses to do this and you're on basic service, you'll automatically be switched to the municipal aggregation price unless you choose to opt out. What separates a municipal aggregation from competitive electric supply is actually a couple things. One, your city or town is getting together and trying to get the best rate for its residents, right? So it's being looked at by a group of people who are trying to get their city or town residents the best rate. So it's a little bit different than when you're being sold to by a competitive electric supply company just for yourself. And two, there's almost always a no-fault opt-out, no cancellation fees. If you're on the municipal aggregation rate and it's just not working for you and you want to go back to basic service, or for whatever reason you want to go to a separate competitive electric supply company, right, you can opt out of the municipal aggregation rate without having to pay a cancellation fee in almost every situation that I've seen, which is something that really does separate it from when you yourself sign up with a competitive electric supply company. In competitive supply, as we've talked about, when you sign up with a competitive electric supply company, you're contracting with this private company, and you're agreeing to receive your electric supply for a specific rate. So all the things about that rate are going to be in the contract, right? And we'll talk about some of those aspects, but it's not that it's fixed for a certain period of time by statute, right? When you're signing up with that contract length can really be any amount of time. It can be really for any price, and that's on you when you sign up with a competitive electric supply company. So some tips for consumers as you're being marketed to by these competitive electric supply companies. One thing to be aware of, you want to be aware of impersonators. Your utility company is never going to go door to door and ask to see your utility bill or your account. The primary reason for this is that your utility company does not make a profit on your supply of electricity. The price they pay, and it's in what's called cents per kilowatt hour is how that price, your electric supply price, is quoted. The the price that they pay, the cents per kilowatt hour that they pay to procure that electricity, is the cost that they pass on to the consumer. So they have no reason to send someone to talk to you about your electric supply options, to go door to door, to make phone calls, because they're not allowed to make a profit on it. It also means that they're fairly agnostic about who is supplying your electricity, right? Which is why I think a lot of these electric supply companies are able to change folks. That folks are getting switched, because your utility company is not really fighting for you to stay on their service because they're not making a profit. It also means they're not going to market to you like that. You want to protect your utility account number as if it were your credit card, as if it were a social security number, as if it were anything that you wouldn't just want to give out when someone comes to your door. This is one that really stuck with me, right? Because I would not have thought my utility account number was some sort of personal identifiable information that I needed to keep from someone who may be coming to my door. But the reason for this is that utility account number is really all the competitive electric supply company needs to switch you over to their service. So a lot of these electric supply company salespeople are working on commission. They're going to door, they're calling, and they're hoping that they can get you to agree to sign up to their services. But if you have a particularly unscrupulous salesperson, and they're not getting anybody to sign up, and they know they're not going to make any money for that day, well, if they have your utility account number, they can switch you over without your consent there. And unfortunately, that does happen. It's called slamming. And that's, again, a reason why we tell everybody to check their utility bills, because unfortunately, some people have been switched over without their consent. How that interaction is generally going to go is they're not going to specifically ask you for your utility account number. They may, but most likely they're going to ask to see your utility bill. They're going to look at it. They may say something like, oh, you're paying so much more than you'd be paying with us, hoping that they can get you to sign up for their services. But while they're saying that, they write down your utility account number. And if enough conversations don't go well enough, right, you have an unscrupulous salesperson, they may switch you over without your consent. The other thing, as you're being marketed to, is to know how to evaluate your electric rate. Your basic service rate, as we mentioned on the previous slide, is going to change every 6 months. And your rate is usually going to be higher in the winter and lower in the summer. I just want to pause on that for a second just to think about it a little bit more. Your rate is going to be higher in the winter and lower in the summer. It's possible that your total electricity bill is lower in the winter and higher in the summer, and that's because in Massachusetts, the vast majority of us do not heat with electricity. Now, obviously, some of us do, but the vast majority of us heat with either heating oil or natural gas. But we cool ourselves with electricity. We use electricity to run our fans and our air conditioners. So our total usage is much higher in the summer, even to the point where with that lower rate, our total bills may be higher. But our electricity rate, and when we're looking at our supply charges, right, the winter rate is generally going to be higher than the summer rate. And that's important to keep in mind, especially as we enter the springtime, and we may still be paying that winter rate, right, but our rate's about to go down, right? We don't want to get contracted to a rate that's a little bit lower, but not as low as that rate would go. Some tips for consumers: if you've got past the marketing period and you are thinking about signing a contract with a competitive electric supply company, here are some questions that you should ask, and perhaps we should change the order of these questions, because to me, what is the most important question is the one we have second to last here, which is, are you saving money over the course of the contract? Over the course of this contract, the life of the contract, and maybe even a little bit more detail, right? Are you saving money while you're doing business with this company? Because you may go beyond the life of the original contract. And I think as we ask some of these questions that we have listed out here, what's going to become apparent is that it's very, very difficult to tell if you're going to save money over the course of the contract. First question is, how long is the contract? Is it an especially long contract where you're stuck with this company even if you decide that it may not be right for you anymore? Is it a really short contract? Is it a contract just a couple of months? And are we worried that it might be a low teaser rate that they've gotten you into, and that rate's going to skyrocket as you go along? Is your rate fixed or variable? That's a big consideration, right? Is the rate fixed? The rate that you're paying this month, is that fixed for a certain period of time? Or from the beginning, is it variable? Are you paying this month, but you don't really know what you're going to be paying in future months while you're on this contract? Does my contract auto-renew? I think as We've seen, as we've gone out and had these presentations, what I found is almost every single contract does auto-renew. And then this other question we have here, the last question, if my contract auto-renews, will I be charged the same or different rate? Almost every contract we see auto-renews, and when it auto-renews at a variable rate. So it makes it very difficult to be able to tell how much you're going to be paying after the initial life of the contract. Is there a cancellation fee? Right? Is there a cancellation fee if your contract, you decide all of a sudden it's a variable rate and it's much higher than you'd be paying on basic service? For the most part, I think most of these do have cancellation fees that we've seen. They generally fall into one of two buckets, which is it's a pretty high one-time payment. It's $50, $100 to cancel the contract, or it's a lower amount that's based on the months remaining on the contract. It's $5, it's $10, it's $15 per month remaining on the contract, where if you've had one of those really long contracts, right, that can be a pretty high amount of money, and it may leave you in a situation where you really can't save money either way you go, right? It costs you so much to cancel the contract, the savings you get by switching back to a municipal aggregation or a fixed basic service rate are not realized because you have to pay that cancellation fee. Again, are you saving money over the course of the contract, over the course of the duration of while you're doing business with this competitive electric supply company? I think as we've shown through these questions, it can be really, really difficult to determine if that's the case. Not the least of which is it can be really, really difficult to forecast what the cost of electricity is going to be in 2 or 3 years, right? Businesses have teams of people that are doing this, but in this instance, you have to make that decision for your household by yourself without access to a lot of that information. So it can be very, very difficult to determine. You have 3 days to cancel a contract with a competitive electric supply company. I want to say just a couple things about that. That's a no-fault, no cancellation fee cancellation there. That's keeping with the general 3-day right to cancel in Massachusetts, which is for any purchases that are made at your home or away from a business's general place of business, right? There's not a blanket 3-day right to cancel, but if someone is coming to your home and marketing to you, you do have a 3-day right to cancel there. You can cancel past that point, but you may have the cancellation fee. And of course, this is not touching on things like when you're switched without your knowledge, right? That is something we'll talk about, your recourse there, but not an area where you would have to know within 3 days that you've been switched. So we have a quick example here. Let's say it's February. You're paying 13.71, again, the cents per kilowatt hour is how we're measuring that. You have a competitive electric supply company that comes around. They're offering you a fixed rate of 12.25 cents per kilowatt hour with a 9-month contract term. And unfortunately, this is not as interactive as some of the presentations that we're able to give in person, but we have the question, should you switch? And generally what we're told is no, and that's true. You probably shouldn't switch, because while you don't know for sure, your price with your basic service rate is likely to go down in the summer months. So these numbers that we picked were actually real numbers. That 13.7 was National Grid's price last winter. I think it's almost identical this winter, maybe a little bit higher. And in May, when that switched to the summer rate, that went down to 10.8 cents per kilowatt hour. So that means in the summer months, when your total electricity usage is generally at its highest, again, that's assuming you don't heat with electricity, you're paying more than had you not switched. You're paying more if you switched with that competitive electric supply company by about the same premium that you initially saved while you're using the most electricity. And what we found that our office, the folks in our Energy and Telecommunications Division, have studied this issue or have done a study for 3 years. Everyone who switched to a competitive electric supply company, and what they found is that those folks who switched cumulatively lost $253 million over just a 3-year period, right? $253 million were lost because they switched to a competitive electric supply company rather than staying on that fixed basic service. So a couple things there. That's not to say every single person who switched lost money. That's not the case. There were some who were able to save money. That's not to say that every single person who switched thinking they'd save money. You know, some of these companies offer you a greener option, and you may be willing to pay a premium to get that greener option, more renewable energy, and that, of course, is your choice. But I think the vast majority of people switched because they thought they were getting a better deal. And clearly, to the tune of $253 million over 3 years, that has not been the case in Massachusetts. So just some quick charts here so you can see this laid out from our example. If you do switch to that competitive electric supply company, you initially do see savings in those first couple months. of course, then those savings are erased when the basic service switches over to the summer rate. This assumes level usage of electricity, so I think in many ways this is sort of a charitable explanation of what could happen for the competitive electric supply company. Again, as we've talked about, it's likely that in June, July, August, even into September, right, you're using a lot more electricity than you may have been using in those spring months. The second chart adds up the months, the total cumulative cost, how much you pay over the whole 9-month period, and as you can see, it ends up costing you just under about $30 to have switched. Again, that's assuming level usage, that's fairly charitable, and what this is not touching on is the fact that in November, your contract with that competitive electric supply company is likely to auto-renew. It's likely to auto-renew at a variable rate, and it's likely to auto-renew at a variable rate at the most expensive time of the year for electricity. So yes, with basic service, you may go up to almost 14 cents per kilowatt hour, but we have seen people on competitive electric supply with variable rate who are paying over 20 cents per kilowatt hour. We saw a gentleman out in the western part of the state who during the summer months, when he was in a national grid area, he should have been paying just under 11 cents per kilowatt hour, was paying over 22 cents per kilowatt hour. And I think when you see numbers like that, you can see how $253 million were lost over 3 years. So some examples here. Another thing that we see is that disproportionately, low-income areas are on competitive electric supply, and so I guess it stands to reason that are targeted by competitive electric supply companies. I think that's probably for a couple of reasons. The first is low-income urban areas. The houses are closer together, right? It may just be easier to send someone door to door and sign people up. Second is I think they are playing to folks who have a difficult time paying their electricity bills, who are having a tough time keeping up with their electricity bills. And when someone comes in with a low teaser rate, right, it may seem like a good idea to switch over to that competitive electric supply company. But as we've seen, after those initial terms, right, it's very likely you end up paying more. And so what we have here are examples, again, from that study that we did. We studied the whole Commonwealth. $253 million were lost cumulatively over 3 years, but we've singled out 4 cities here. In the city of New Bedford, so in New Bedford, they have a municipal aggregation program. So the city of New Bedford has already gotten what they believe to be the best deal that could be gotten for all the city's residents from a competitive electric supply company. And still, 24% of city residents citywide are on competitive electric supply. Again, that does not include the aggregation. That's 24% of people who are not on the aggregation, are with separate companies. And are paying on average about 3.5 cents more per kilowatt hour than if they were on the aggregation. That number jumps up to 31% of the city's low-income residents. In Lawrence, about 30% of the city's residents are on competitive electric supply, paying just under 4 cents per kilowatt hour more. That jumps up to 39% of the city's low-income residents who are paying just over 4 cents per kilowatt hour more. In Springfield, just over a quarter of the city's residents are on competitive electric supply, paying, again, just a little bit over 3 cents per kilowatt hour more. That number jumps all the way up to 44%. Nearly half of the city's low-income residents are on competitive electric supply, again, paying about 3 cents more per kilowatt hour. In Quincy, just under 20%, about a fifth of city residents are on competitive electric supply. But again, that number more than doubles to 39% of the city's low-income residents, again, paying about the same amount there, just over 3 cents per kilowatt hour more with the competitive electric supply company. So you're having trouble paying your bills, as we just talked about, right? It may not be the case that switching to a competitive electric supply company is actually going to save you money. In fact, it seems that it's not the case. You do have a number of options. Your utility company offers many things, including budget billing. So budget billing is when you estimate your total usage for the year based on what you've used in the past, rather than paying the ups and downs, paying more in the summer, less in the winter, whatever it may be. You pay a level amount each month, which allows you to better budget. And your utility company keeps tabs on that. If it looks like you're using too much electricity, they may up that amount. You'll figure it out at the end of the situation there. If you get a credit on your account, if you didn't use as much electricity as you paid for, but it allows you to better budget for your electricity usage. Your utility company may have low income rates that you could qualify for. They may have arrearage management, so if you fall behind on your electricity bills, rather than having to pay everything at once, you can add a certain amount to each monthly bill and then catch up on those arrears and not have to worry about a shut-off. You can file a complaint with the Attorney General's office and request assistance from our Consumer Advocacy and Response Division, our Consumer Advocacy Service. I made a brief mention to that earlier in the beginning of the presentation. So you file a complaint with us. In this case, we reach out to the utility company on your behalf. Let's say you're having difficulty contacting them to get into one of these programs. We'll reach out to them on your behalf, try to work something out that works for both parties. Again, you should know that the average consumer who signs up with a competitive electric supply company, and I believe this was for the period of the summer of July 2016 to June 2017, consumers who switched paid on average $226 more per year. And that is a large amount of money, especially for those on tight budgets. $226 more by switching. If they had done nothing, they would not have lost that money, or had they not been switched without their knowledge, they would not have lost that amount of money. But $226 is the average for that 1 year period. Some other consumer protections that you have. So we're coming up on this, what's called the winter moratorium from November 15th through March 15th. Your source of heating cannot be shut off in the winter moratorium because, unfortunately, we've had fairly cold springs lately. That date is often extended to April 1st. I believe I've seen it extended as far as April 15th in the past. Important to know, though, your source of heating may not be electricity, right? Chances are it's not. So your source of heating cannot be shut off, but it's not the case that perhaps your electricity cannot be shut off. If all residents of your home are over the age of 65, your electricity and your gas cannot be shut off without prior permission from the Department of Public Utilities. So if that's the case and you're getting threatening notices or letters about a shutoff, I think first contacting your utility company, letting them know, hey, everybody here is over the age of 65 is probably the way to go. And if that doesn't work, then contacting the Department of Public Utilities. Everyone being over the age of 65 is one of those protections there. There are other protections as well. If you or someone in your home is seriously ill, that also applies. If you have an infant, a child under 1 year, 12 months, that's also going to apply. And if everyone in your home is over 65, except there's a minor child, that those protections still apply. And again, I would start by reaching out to your utility company. If that doesn't work, potentially reach out to the Department of Public Utilities. So last thing that we have here, it's a slightly different subject, but it comes up a lot as we do these presentations. A lot of folks are also being marketed to by solar companies. And I think, if you want to switch to solar, of course, it's a laudable goal to switch to more renewable energy, to a greener source of energy. It could also be the case that it ends up saving you money switching to that source of energy, but I think it's important to take your time as we have here. Ask for a paper contract that you're signing. Make sure you're understanding all the details before you switch to solar. If you're thinking about switching to rooftop solar, if you own your own home and you have a good roof for it, you have a good amount of sunlight, right? You think rooftop solar might be a good idea for you. Some things to keep in mind. The solar panels can last for over 20 years, right? In fact, today most of these do, 20, 25 years, even 30 years of the lifetime of the solar panel. Is your roof going to last that long, right? Is your roof already 20 or 30 years old? And if something goes wrong with your roof, who's going to be responsible for taking those solar panels down and putting them back up? Something to keep in mind if you're thinking about rooftop solar. The other thing is if you're leasing solar panels, which I think is a popular option, that you don't have to pay out the whole amount up front, right? You can make monthly payments to pay off these solar panels as you have them on your roof. Be aware that the sale of that contract is also going to have to be sold with your home, right? That's going to be a lien against your home, so that if you go to sell your home, any prospective buyer, the first thing they're going to see is that there is this amount against your home. You're going to need to take care of that either by paying it off yourself, negotiating with that buyer, right? You might not get as much for the home as you wanted in that case. Again, not to say that it's going to derail everything, but it's something to keep in mind and something that some folks are not aware of when they go to sell their home. It's also possible that you can't do rooftop solar. Perhaps you don't own your home. Perhaps you don't have a strong enough roof for it, or you just have too much shade at your house. It wouldn't be worth it. You can think about signing up with what's called a community solar farm. So these are large-scale solar farms. There are hundreds or dozens to hundreds of solar panels, and essentially you buy a share into that solar farm. And what you're trying to do there is to have the share that you buy produce enough electricity to offset your electricity usage, right? So how it works is you pay a certain amount to this community solar farm. They send credits to your utility company. and then, you know, if it offsets there, all you're doing is paying the solar farm, you're going to figure out what your total monthly contribution to energy is going to be, whether it's just a little bit to your electricity bill and a little bit to the solar farm, or lots to the solar farm that takes care of your electricity bill. You can estimate that, right? Important to be aware of a couple things there. One, a lot of these community solar farms are going to have annual escalations in the price. The price that you pay to the solar farm may go up by a certain amount every year. Is that going to be what the amount, the cost of electricity from your utility company is going up, right? Is it more than that? Is it less than that? Something to keep in mind. Also be aware that these solar farms are operated by utility service areas. So when you buy into a community solar farm, those credits can only go to one utility company. So if you move, let's say you sign up when you're in a national grid service area and you move to an Eversource service area, well, your shares there, your credits have essentially become useless because they're still going to national grid, and now you need to pay Eversource for your electric supply. You're likely going to have to find somebody to buy you out in that instance, and it's a fairly new area. I myself don't know how hard it is to find someone to buy those shares from you, but something to keep in mind if you are thinking about moving, and also to be aware that, you know, you can move literally down the street and change utility service areas. So something to be in mind and keep in mind there if you do think of signing up with the community solar farm. We have here, and as I said, we'll send this presentation out as a PDF copy, so you will be able to get the link. There's a solar electricity residential guide, which has a lot more information about this that can be helpful for you. So if you're having a problem with a competitive electric supply company, you can contact us. I would say contact the Attorney General's office, our Consumer Advocacy and Response Division, for most problems you're having with a competitive electric supply company. If they misrepresented the price, if they misrepresented who they were, having trouble keeping up, you're not sure that they're doing what they said they were going to be doing, all those complaints can come to us. I think if you were switched without your knowledge, right, that slamming process that we talked about earlier, I think in that case that your first contact should probably be the Department of Public Utilities, whose number you see there. But for pretty much everything else, I would contact the Attorney General's office first and see if our Consumer Advocacy Service can help you out there. So that's all that I have on our presentation. Again, I want to thank you for joining us for this webinar this morning. Happy to answer any questions that folks may have, and I will keep on the line. I'm going to go on mute for right now, but if you do have any questions, feel free to utilize that chat function, and we will do our best to answer them. But again, thank you so much.